Welcome, Ken Burns, to Urban View Morning with Lamont King and Greg Carr. Glad to have you, brother.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Really
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
it.
Of course, we're very excited about the debut of your latest work, collaboration with your daughter and your son-in-law, Leonardo da Vinci, on October the 18th and 19th, PBS. But before we turn to Leonardo, latest of your projects, I wanted to ask you. I've been teaching at Howard for about 24 years. And back in 2015, you came and got one of your over 30 honorary degrees, Doctor of Humane Letters. And I'll never forget you standing there and saying, among other things, today I feel like I'm among my people. And, I would say that if I had a chance to be in conversation with you, I would ask you, given the real influence of your work, but for me, baseball, jazz, the Civil War, Jackie Robinson, Unforgivable Blackness, with the interlocutors, everybody from Albert Murray and Wynton Marsalis, Stanley Crouch, to many who practiced the craft, Buck O'Neill, Dizzy Gillespie, so many others. I think of you as a memory maker. Now, you've been hugely influential, but as a narrator, and I always wanted to ask you this, and particularly after that moment, how you conceive the presence of African people in this U.S. experiment. It's almost like it's not just a narrative theme, but it's in some ways our presence is a glue, a spine. And when
Yes.
you said that day, I always wanted to ask you what you meant by that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's it. We put African American history, Black history into February, our coldest and shortest month. And I know why, Dr. Whitson. I know why I was born, but I actually think it's at the burning heart of the entire American project. We have people in our midst who have the peculiar experience of being unfree in a free land. Our genius as Americans is improvisation, and who has to improvise even more than that in order to survive if you have that memory or that current experience of being unfree in a free land. And so it makes African American history at the center of it all. We know exactly what our catechism is. I'm just finishing up a big series that'll be out in 1 year on the history of the American Revolution. We know where it began, Philadelphia, 1776, July 4th. We know what words we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I got to stop there because the guy who wrote them owned hundreds of human beings
Absolutely.
and did not see the contradiction or the hypocrisy. And so wherever you go, I've made 40 odd films for PBS. Some are an hour long, some are 20 hours long, and I can't count them as one. And I can count on the fingers of one hand and still have two left to snap my fingers of the ones that don't deal with Black history in America. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're going to do a serious dive into anything, the Revolution, who's the first casualty of the Revolution in 1870 in the Boston
Christmas.
Massacre,
Christmas.
right? Who's fighting in the Continental Army? Who's being, it's everywhere you turn.
Absolutely.
That story is there. And what happens is, and it's very understandable, as you begin to find some kind of agency, you want to tell a story. But typically what happens is you pull that story out of another narrative and you resegregate it, right? I'm
Yes.
just going to make a film on black soldiers. Don't want to take anything away from Bill Miles, the late great documentary, filmmaker who made a great thing. But we want to put it in. We've tried to put it into the history and make it inseparable from it, and not just suddenly go, okay, now we're doing the obligatory black section. And
Yeah.
so what you begin to understand is that these people who were stolen from their own culture, from their own language, from their own religious practices, who come to the United States, who are forced to adopt a new language, new customs, new dress, new religion, actually take that religion to heart and bring it in its most vibrant shape, and embody the aspects of, as Albert Murray said, aspiration in the face of adversity, but also forgiveness and reconciliation. You think of what happened at Mother Emanuel in Charleston. So, how could you not, as somebody who's interested in understanding who we are, not be drawn to a separate narrative of Black people in America, but it fully integrated in the best sense of the word and the sense of the centrality of the African American experience to the American experience?
Absolutely. And your work And I have to say this, given the opportunity, just being in just a brief conversation with you, it does integrate that history and it integrates it on its own terms
That's right.
in the
Period.
sense that,
Period. That's it. We call balls and strikes. This is what happened. And guess what? You cannot edit out. You cannot pan your camera away and say, well, that's didn't happen, right? We
right.
just said, yes, it did. And we're not pulling it out to put it on a mountain and separate it so it feels like something different. Because
Mm.
that also doesn't serve the people who are learning it that way, and it doesn't serve the people who don't believe it should be taught that way. They think, there it is. Now I'm a victim. My story's not being told. You hear that in the stupid Confederate monuments argument. Well, they're taking away my history. No, we're not. We're
No
just
question.
enlarging it.
No question.
We're just
So
giving you a
maybe,
bigger, more complicated, and more interesting story that we can tell.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Maybe we can build a bridge to Leonardo since
Yeah.
that's the task at hand. Can't wait to see the American Revolution because I know you're going to cover us on every side of it. Has meant fought for the British, the
Yeah.
ones that ran away. Can't wait to see how that's going to emerge. But
No, it's
in
to
the
come.
opening of part one of the two-part documentary that you finished, the opening quote, and by the way, Keith David is an international treasure. It's always good to hear his voice. The quote is knowledge and imagination are intimately related.
Exactly.
You have gone outside the United States for the first time in terms of a subject, and you decided to do this with your daughter, with your son-in-law. Why Da Vinci,
Yeah, well,
and
so
why
it's
that?
it's sort of accidental, Greg. I mean, my daughter Sarah Burns and her husband David McMahon and I have been working together for 15 years. We made the Central Park 5 film.
Yes,
We made, which got the city to settle finally after all those years, their lawsuit in their favor.
right.
We made a film on Jackie Robinson. We made a big long film on Muhammad Ali when everyone told us
Yes,
there was nothing new to learn about Muhammad Ali.
yes.
And we're working on one on the history right now of emancipation, of Reconstruction called Emancipation to Exodus. And that'll be a couple, 3 years away. But we've been working on that for years. But I had an opportunity and I was, to do Leonardo and I was pushing it away. And suddenly they said, why? And so we just jumped into it, and it does the intersection of that is really important. I didn't go to Howard. I am honored by the degree that they bestowed on me, but it's an honorary degree. I went to Hampshire College, where their Latin motto was non satiscire. To know is not enough. It means you can accumulate all this stuff. You can become a specialist in anything you want, and you can spout all the statistics that you want to spout. But it's until you synthesize that knowledge into understanding. And in Leonardo, we have the most incredible human being that has perhaps ever lived, who knew more than anything. He's not only the greatest artist of the Renaissance and maybe of all time, and has certainly the most famous painting of all time, he's also the greatest scientist. Before he had an opportunity to engage a microscope or a telescope, he's doing gravity stuff well before Galileo. He's the greatest anatomist. He's the greatest botanist. He studied flight. He studied water dynamics. He studied rock formations and atmospheric stuff, all in the service of his art, and his art is in the service of the science. And so you've arguably got the man of the last millennium here, the person of the last millennium, who has taught us so much about that intersection. And um, he's named after the patron saint of freedom, Leonardo,
Hmm.
because he's born out of wedlock. Because he's born out of wedlock, he can't enjoy the privileges that his father has as a notary. And God forbid he should have been able to go to university and become a notary. We would have missed this guy. He made nature and the perfection of God's nature his greatest teacher. And he spends his whole life in that field. So he is greater than Aristotle, who's a philosopher and a writer and a thinker, because Leonardo's that. But he's also the greatest scientist of his age, and he's the greatest anatomist, he's the greatest inventor, the greatest engineer, and oh, by the way, the greatest painter. Having one person, all of this sort of stuff. And he'd look at me and he'd go, why are you making distinctions? Why are you putting this silo about him? And that's what I think is why he's so modern to us, because he speaks to that human freedom, that liberation that comes from observation and experimentation, not accepting the dogma of whatever, the received wisdom from the ancients, from the church. So when he does the Last Supper, or he does the Virgin and the Rocks, or he does, the Annunciation, they're different than any other paintings that have ever been done. Even the Adoration of the Magi, which is an abandoned painting, is
Mm,
itself this spectacular work of art, which you're going, fine, leave it the way it is, because it's considered the first experimental piece of art, because he's changing things as he's going along. He puts himself as a character in the lower right-hand corner, and it's the only person that's not focused on the Christ in the Adoration of the Magi. And he's looking the other way, and you're thinking either one of two things. Either I, Leonardo, have solved all the problems I wanted to solve in this painting and I'm out of here, or you know what? This painting isn't big enough to handle the things I'm asking, so I'm out of here. Either way, he's not bothered by what we go, wait, he didn't finish it. It's half, he has fewer than 20 paintings and half of those are unfinished. No, we revel in the fact that his life transcends the patrons, transcends the church, transcends the Medicis and the Duke of Milan and all this stuff, in order to be about knowledge and the synthesis of that knowledge into understanding, some worldview. And so while he doesn't have a telescope and he doesn't have a microscope, so he doesn't know about the atom and he doesn't know about the solar system, he understands that there are profound similarities in the architecture of both those things and of
mhm.
many things. That's why his Vitruvian Man is this perfect human thing based on the proportions of the perfect temple. And
Yes.
so all of a sudden, you're negotiating a relationship to God, relationship to earth. There's very much earthly things involved with him. He's funny. He puts on stage plays. He's probably gay. I mean, where all these sorts of things are operating in him, and yet none of them. He becomes the master of his circumstances rather than his circumstances mastering him. Which is, isn't it? Going back to your first question, isn't that all we any of us want to
Indeed.
do?
Indeed. Yes, sir.
Isn't that
Is
the cry
it,
of Black Americans, if not all Americans, is
Oh,
how am I free? What makes me free? What is the thing? I can enslave myself in lots of other ways, as James Baldwin told me in a film I made on the Statue of Liberty. If I
mhm.
hate Jews, I'm enslaved. If I love money, I'm enslaved. If I, we're really a world of willing slaves because of our appetites and
Mm.
passions, and that what you want and what you look for is the freedom that comes from liberating ourselves. And Leonardo's one of many great guides, I think, that we have before us to learn.
Yes, sir.
from a personality standpoint, I find him extremely fascinating. And what I picked up from part one of the documentary is his genius was wide ranging
Right,
across a number of different, studies and sciences. He's more of a scientist to me than anything, because his art and his gift was used to articulate a lot of the concepts and pretenses that hundreds of years later would be proven to be true.
right,
And so I learned that also, um, hundreds of sketches never actually published. A lot was lost. And there was one quote that stood out where he said, "If you want to master anything, you first copy the work of the master,
right.
and then train on it to guide you to better work." With that being said, do you think a lot of the genius originated with him? Is
Yes,
is he just this miracle of creativity
yes.
that we didn't haven't seen before and have never seen since?
And thank you for saying that, because people have, I've done a ton of interviews, and if you say, well, who among us today is like Leonardo? Is it Elon Musk? And you go, oh my God, no. This guy is living in a narrow groove where Leonardo is so wide and generous and capacious. I think he's a gift. I don't have any other way to explain it. I think circumstances, about born out of wedlock, having nature as the first teacher, having Verrocchio, Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the great artists and sculptors of that period, apprenticing there, but also being constrained by him and then liberating himself and going and leaving Florence, and both being he's not a tortured artist, right? He's not a tortured guy. He's not a wizard. He's not Gandalf. He's only till the end do we get to endow him with that kind of wizardry stuff. He's young and he's vibrant and he's funny and everybody's good company. One of his biographers says he's a work of art before he even starts to make a work of art. So there's
Mhm.
something joyous about him. He's not tortured like Michelangelo. He's not a brat like Raphael. He's not a murderer like Caravaggio. I mean, you take, I mean, that's the only competition in the Renaissance. Maybe Bernini's sculptures are in the same kind of league of motion and emotion that he has. Kind of, I both believe they both invented cinema. And I think if Leonardo were here today,
Mhm.
he'd be a filmmaker and I'd be out of business.
Nah, y'all be collaborating,
That would
which
be a great, I'd love to.
which you actually, interestingly enough, I was watching an interview you did. I think it was with CBS, and the three of you were together, and you talked about your process, how they kind of drafted the narrative, and then you came in and began to, play around with, and then ultimately produce the kind of imagery and trade, including for you, I guess, if not a new technique, certainly something a little different, kind of posing the old and the new. Could you
Yeah.
talk about your creative process?
Yeah, well, that Sarah and Dave is that too, and the soundtrack, which we've never had a scored film in which it lifts it up. The great genius of Caroline Shaw has done that. But Sarah and Dave realized that as Sarah puts it, Leonardo's a lateral thinker, so you need to encompass that lateralness. So that means we're splitting the screen. I'm working on this history of the American Revolution right now. I can't do that. I can't do that. There's no
Mm.
photographs or newsreels, but we throw in photographs and newsreels during the course of the Leonardo because he's anticipating. He's dreaming for all of us. He didn't invent the helicopter, but he allowed us to dream of it. He prophesized all these things, human flight, all of that stuff. So we're all, in a way, still dreaming and actualizing his dreams. And that required new things: animation, the soundtrack, the split screens, using modern and live footage and juxtaposing them with the drawings. You see something in nature that shows the veins of a tree leaf, and you've got his drawings of that. And so you're beginning to see in a kind of cascading fashion the just sheer size of the genius. It isn't just genius isn't plodding and slow. It's just micro processing at a level that maybe the big search engines have. He had something. And so and thank you also for making my day by asking me good questions, not only about Leonardo, but about this American project of ours.
That aspect of it definitely drew me in because it allowed for a better understanding on, like, one thing I picked up on. He said, you know, his talent is gifted from God, but included in the gift is the permission to question it.
The question. Yeah, this
And
is what
so
what
everything,
what you've quoted is Guillermo del Toro, the Mexican filmmaker who writes
mhm,
drawings and keeps notebooks just like Leonardo. And we called him up and said, "Are you
yeah,
influenced?" And he goes, "Am I influenced?" And then he says that these things like knowledge and imagination are not two separate universes; they're the same, and that his great gift was to question the universe and to ask questions of it. And there's a strange power that comes from Leonardo in that security to be able to do that, and we're all the beneficiaries of those uh, whatever he discovered, what he brought to us. It's just extraordinary. Anyway,
We've got I know we're going to get close to the end in a second. I want to ask you a little bit more about the score. Of course, remembering Jack Johnson and Wynton
yeah,
Marsalis, you almost like Jack Johnson, this superhero. You give him a theme song at the beginning
yeah,
of that project that is indelible in my mind as it plays.
yeah.
But this is a little bit different, huh? An
But
original
it's the same
score.
sort of thing. I'm glad you heard that too, because like Jack Johnson wasn't scored, but Wynton did some themes for us, and then we began to use them and reuse them and stuff like that. And Wynton and I are still close. As he says, brothers from another mother, and we spend time together and we talk about it. Caroline was a different. She went in and she just gave us themes. She's part of a vocal group called Roomful of Teeth, and she uses a percussive group called So Percussion, and she uses a quartet called Attack Quartet, and they add a bass. And they played together in the studio, but they never been together in public. And a week or so ago, we had a big thing at Town Hall where Louis Armstrong played in Manhattan, and they just ripped the whole everybody's head. We showed clips from the film, but it was really they're playing, and you begin to realize, as Winton says, music is the art of the invisible, which means that all other art forms, painting, theater, documentary, whatever, when they die and go to heaven, they want to be music. And in fact, all the terms of our editing room are musical terms. And so she just lifted his thing up. That was it. I'm
It,
sorry I got to go because
yes, yes, of course. Listen, Ken Burns,
do this any other time.
filmmaker. It's a real honor, man. Hopefully, we'll get to talk again sometime. We can't wait for Leonardo da Vinci, the 18th and 19th, debuting later this month. Thank you
Thank
again.
you so much. Great to be with you. Bye bye.